Debate on that bill from earlier today.
I rise today in support of H.R. 266, the fiscal year 2019 Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill. Today is the 21st day of the Trump shutdown, and the damage it inflicts on the families and communities across this country continues to grow. More than 800,000 federal workers are without pay, and today will be the first missed paycheck for those families. Many of our civil servants are working without pay, and telling them that they have to file for unemployment is outrageous and it's wrong. Today, Democrats are offering this bill that provides critical funds to reopen the Department of Interior, the Environmental Protection Agency, Indian Health Service, and other important agencies. Our national parks, America's crown jewels, are under threat. This administration continues to allow visitors to enter as if everything is normal. Our Park Service does not have the funding to ensure visitor safety and address the most basic standards of cleanliness and protect park assets. Joshua Tree National Park is experiencing significant damage because there are not enough rangers to stop off-road driving in the park. New tracks are being cut into the sensitive landscape, and many of Joshua's trees, the precious namesake of this park, have been destroyed. Just this past week, the Department of Interior announced an illegal plan to force parks to start redirecting funds from entry fees. Now, those fees are designated for capital improvement projects, and now they'll be used to clean toilets. There is no substitute for the park system's annual operation budget of $2.5 billion. And as I said, lasting damage is being done to our national parks, and their long-term upkeep is being compromised. We must ensure public safety and protect our pristine spaces, and that's why I'm calling on the National Park Service to close all parks until the government reopens. Congress needs to pass this bill to fully fund and staff and protect our national parks. Passing this bill will allow the Forest Service to get back to work on critical activities like hazardous fuel management. That work needs to happen now in order to prevent wildfires. The Environmental Protection Agency's mission to protect human health and the environment. But the Trump shutdown has furloughed more than 13,000 employees, stopping inspections at drinking water systems, stopping inspections at hazardous waste management facilities, and stopping inspections at chemical facilities. This places the health of the American people and their communities in jeopardy. The Trump shutdown is particularly threatening to the health and safety of our Native American brothers and sisters. Once again, we have failed to meet our treaty responsibilities to tribal nations. Basic services like health clinics, tribal justice services, food assistance for seniors are being put at risk for nearly 1.9 million Americans throughout Indian country. Approximately 54% of the Indian Health Service budget goes to tribal organizations to run their own programs. During the Trump shutdown, critical programs in Indian country run by tribal organizations stop. This includes domestic violence prevention initiatives, Indian Children Program, the Suicide Prevention Program, and alcohol and substance abuse programs. Native American Lifelines is an example of a health care program that is under contract with the Indian Health Service. Clinics focus on care for the needy and the elderly. And I am outraged to report that as of today, these remarks that I deliver, well, those clinics have been forced to close. And they will not be able to continue to coordinate care for their patients. Like the 80-year-old woman who depends on Native American Lifelines to help her manage her type 2 diabetes. It's time to reopen the government. The Interior bill before us was drafted by the Senate, passed overwhelmingly with a bipartisan vote of 92-6. This bill also should be familiar to everyone, as it was part of a 6-bill package that passed overwhelmingly on the House floor with bipartisan votes last week. This bill provides $35.9 billion, which is $601 million over fiscal year 18 enacted. It maintains funding for nearly every agency at or above fiscal 18 enacted level, including the Environmental Protection Agency. It's important to note, however, this bill does not contain any new partisan riders. Now, clearly, I would have written things differently, especially with regard to funding for Indian country. However, this bill will immediately open up the Department of Interior and the EPA and other agencies and give us a path forward to end the Trump shutdown. Last year, Congress had the opportunity to pass the bill negotiated by the Conference Committee, but Republican leadership controlled the floor, and they chose not to finish their work. And then we thought there was an agreement to keep the government open while the issues of homeland security were being worked out. Senator McConnell brought the continuing resolution to the floor of the Senate, and it passed unanimously. But Speaker Ryan, along then with President Trump, decided to shut down the government, and Congress went home. Now nearly 800,000 employees are without a paycheck today, and Democrats are doing everything that we can to quickly pass a bipartisan bill to reopen the government. We need to finish last year's work so that we can move forward to serve the American people in 2019. So I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this bill, and Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the bill.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to H.R. 266, the Democratic proposal for funding the Department of Interior, Environmental Protection Agency, related agencies, and the remainder for fiscal year 2019. This bill is almost entirely a Senate product. As such, it ignores the bipartisan priorities of the House, and perhaps even worse, it abdicates congressional responsibility under the Constitution to keep the executive branch in check. Before I get into the details of the bill, however, I want to take a moment to congratulate my friend and colleague, Betty McCollum, for her appointment as the new chair of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies. She's been a tireless advocate for programs under the jurisdiction of this subcommittee, a firm but fair overseer of agency operations, a tough negotiator, and above all, a good friend. She'll be an outstanding chair. I wish her well, and I look forward to working with her in both of our new capacities. Madam Speaker, over the past year, Ms. McCollum and I worked in collaboration to write a bill representing the needs and priorities of the House. We held 9 budget oversight hearings, including 4 hearings with nearly 80 tribal leaders regarding programs that honor treaty rights promised to our Native American brothers and sisters. We wrote a bill, accommodated in some shape or form, roughly 93% of all House member requests, regardless of party. On top of that, when the bill came to the House floor, 70 amendments were debated and 50 were adopted. And when told to begin negotiating the House-passed bill last year, we defended it against competing priorities in the Senate. And we came together on numerous topics to write a report language directives that maintain a check on the executive branch. I'm extremely proud of our work. We are so close to a final product. We shouldn't be throwing it all away with the bill before us today, a bill that the Senate has already said it will not consider, and the President will not sign. Let me highlight just a few of the House priorities missing in this product which concern me the most and which are likely to concern our colleagues on both sides of the aisle. First and foremost, the bill leaves all congressional report language directives. These directives are critical for keeping the executive branch in check. These directives are also the conduit through which the concerns of our constituents back home are heard directly by agency officials at the highest levels. All of our colleagues in the House who have worked with their constituents and worked with the Appropriations Committee over the past year to craft these directives understand the effort that went into them and the impact they have on people's lives back home. The bill before us today throws that away, all that important work. We included language to protect the California water fix from frivolous lawsuits in order to move forward, a water supply project that is critically important to my constituents. By taking up the Senate bill, I'm prevented even fighting for my constituents. But this isn't about priorities. This is about all of the bipartisan priorities of the House of Representatives that are flushed away by rubber stamping the Senate bill. The bill provides $12 million less than last year's House-passed bill for the U.S. Geological Survey's Natural Hazards Research and Early Warning System, the earthquake system, $21 million less for the Forest Service and Department of Interior to clear dead and dying trees from our forests in order to prevent more catastrophic wildfires like the kind we experienced in my home state of California. These ounce of prevention programs save lives, save money, and with so many fires, earthquakes, volcanoes, and other natural disasters in recent years, these programs should be a higher funding priority than they are in this bill. Additionally, this bill provides $77 million less than the House Republican bill for EPA's WIFIA, brownfields, and Superfund remedial programs. These programs provide regulatory relief, leverage federal dollars, improve water infrastructure, and spur economic development. Instead, this bill increases funding for EPA regulatory programs. In many parts of the country, particularly agricultural states, EPA regulations and additional red tape are a bipartisan concern. Even popular EPA grant programs like the Diesel Emission Reduction Grants, DERA, and Target Airshed grants were significantly reduced in this bill. The DERA and Targeted Airshed grants are essential to my home state of California, where air quality remains one of our biggest concerns. My state and constituents rely on these grant programs to help improve air quality, public health by accelerating the replacement of older engines with new, cleaner engines. For our national park system, the bill before us today falls $27 million short of the House-passed level for park operations, reducing the maintenance backlog. With park visitation on the rise, this is no time to cut corners on the budget. This bill also lacks important reforms to implementation of the Endangered Species Act. It lacks the funding needed to prevent the sage-grouse from being listed. Failure to prevent a listing will hurt local economies in 11 western states, undermine our nation's energy security. This bill is almost $10 million below last year's House bill funding for the historic preservation grants, including civil rights grants and grants to underserved communities. The House felt so strongly about these programs that it added $5 million in multiple amendments on the House floor last year. Why would we give up all that funding exceeding to the Senate? Last, but certainly not least, this bill falls $160 million short of last year's House-passed bill in funding treaty obligations to American Indians and Alaskan Natives through the Department of Interior and the Indian Health Service. Early this week, USA Today was the latest news agency to run a front-page article on the sad state of the health care in Indian country, which is funded mostly through the Indian Health Service in this bill. Funding for the Indian Health Service in this bill is $135 million below last year's House-passed level. For an Indian health system that is already rationing the kind of health care that most of us take for granted, every dollar makes a difference in the quality of life of one of our fellow Americans, whose ancestors paid in advance with their lives, their land, to guarantee that the federal government would care for the health of their descendants. Properly funding this obligation is not optional. The House heard from nearly 80 tribal leaders in hearings last year about the importance of funding these programs. Let's not turn our backs on them now, acceding to the Senate position. Madam Speaker, for these reasons and others, I am strongly opposed to this bill, H.R. 266, and I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to stand up to their constituents' priorities, stand for their constituents' priorities, and oppose the bill as well. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I couldn't agree more with my colleague and the former chair when we were developing the bill that we had a much superior product as we came out of conference committee, but it's time to move forward. Speaker Ryan did not bring that to the floor. We must move forward and begin our work, our important work on 2020. Madam Speaker, I yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Loy, the chairwoman of the Full Appropriations Committee.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, the Trump shutdown is now in its 21st day. It is outrageous that more than 800,000 federal employees are going without pay, many of them while they are still working, and the American people are being denied vital services. all because of President Trump's demands for a wasteful border wall. The bill before us today would reopen the Environmental Protection Agency, Department of the Interior, and other critical agencies such as the Indian Health Service and the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board. The Trump shutdown has suspended cleanups of hazardous materials, delayed life-saving rulemaking to keep toxic chemicals like methylene chloride out of American homes. The Trump shutdown threatens the enduring natural beauty and conservation efforts of our national parks as trash piles up and the safety of visitors is in question. Public health and safety should not be political bargaining trips. House Democrats have passed bills to open the government, but the President and the Senate Republicans continue to obstruct and delay instead of working with us to get the people's business done. The solution to this crisis is simple. Pass the bills where we can agree. Extend funding for Homeland Security for a month to allow time for negotiation on border security and immigration policy. I hope that my colleagues across the Capitol come to their senses and stop this ridiculous Trump shutdown. Thank you.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield as much time as she may consume to the gentlewoman from Texas, the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 266. Unfortunately, moving this bill across the House floor will not resolve the partial government shutdown, as the President has said he will not sign this bill into law. It's the job and responsibility of Congress to appropriate funds. We must come together to find a solution that will reopen the government and fund border security. We need a compromise that represents the will of both chambers and the American people. By considering the Senate-passed version of the appropriations bill, we are eliminating House members' involvement in the process. This bill in particular ignores 93% of all House member requests that were included in our bill, including the 50 amendments that were adopted on the floor. This appropriations bill for the Interior Department fails to include the $12 million that House members provided to U.S. Geological Survey programs like the Earthquake Early Warning System that saves lives. It also reduces the amount of funds available to clear dead and dying trees from forests to help prevent the kind of devastating wildfires we saw this year by $21 million. We've heard a lot about the National Park Service during this shutdown. This bill reduces funding for our national parks by $27 million. These are just a few of the priorities of the House that are not included in this bill before us. Madam Speaker, Republicans stand ready and willing to negotiate with our friends on the other side of the aisle on legislation that includes priorities of both parties and both chambers. That's how this legislative body and our system of government is designed to work. I want to thank my colleague from California, Mr. Calvert, for his efforts today and over the last several months to ensure that the House's voice is heard in this debate, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman is recognized. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lee, a member of the Appropriations Committee.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And let me thank Chairwoman McCollum for her leadership on this issue as we try to get the government open. I rise in strong support of the fiscal 2019 Interior Appropriations Bill, which provides $35 billion to partially reopen the government. Now, this bill would also reopen our beautiful national parks and the Smithsonian museums. The situation in our parks right now, it's just not acceptable. 16,000 Park Service employees are not working. Let me repeat that, 16,000 employees. The National Park Service is losing $400,000 a day from this shutdown when uncollected garbage also is piling up. Madam Speaker, this is horrible. It's ridiculous. We need this bill to reopen our parks, our museums, and our visitor centers right away. And we need to pass this bill to keep visitors safe and end the furlough of law enforcement personnel in our national parks. Madam Speaker, these closings are impacting every district in our nation. Near my own district, for example, in the beautiful Bay Area, Muir Woods had to close this week. In addition to wreaking havoc on federal workers' lives, their families, their children, their livelihoods, this Trump shutdown is also having an effect on tourism and the economy. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this bill and yes to reopening the government. The public deserves this, federal workers deserve this, contractors deserve this. The parks, our museums should be open for visitors to visit, and we need to get this government working again. Thank you again, Chairwoman Betty McCollum. I yield the balance of my time.
The chairwoman reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentlelady. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Anderholt.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Ranking Member Calvert. And thank you, Ranking Member Calvert, for your leadership on this bill that we passed back in December. But unfortunately, as you know, I'm rising, Madam Speaker, in opposition of H.R. 266. What we have before us today, however, is yet another Democrat appropriation bill that fails to reflect the House priorities. This time, it ignores 93% of all the House member requests that were included in the House bill and in the report. I'd like to point out just a few of the many House member priorities that were addressed in the House Republican Interior and Environment bill that are not addressed in this current bill. Compared to the House Republican bill, this bill reduces funding for hazardous fuel reduction projects by $21 million. It also reduces funding for operation and maintenance of the National Park System by $27 million. It does not include any of the Endangered Species Act reforms, which are absolutely necessary for the law to work in a practical way. Therefore, Madam Speaker, rather than spending our time debating Senate-passed legislation, which fails to reflect any House priorities, I ask that the Democrats come to the negotiating table so we can secure our border, so we can keep America safe, and that we can resolve this partial shutdown that we are now entering on its 21st day. So I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves, and the gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The time to pass the 2019 bill was December of last year. We need to move forward. And my priority is to get the government open, to get it back working for the American people, and to have the federal employees that are working so hard and those who are forced to be home to have a paycheck. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, who is the chair designee of the VA Milcon Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentlewoman for yielding. I rise today to urge my colleagues to support this appropriations bill, which provides funding for the Department of the Interior, the Environmental Protection Agency, and related agencies. This bill would provide vital funding for water infrastructure, state drinking water systems, national parks, and Everglades restoration projects. Yet we have been locked in a nonsensical shutdown because President Trump continues to insist on his ineffective and offensive border wall scheme. While the president throws a tantrum, people are suffering, and our environment is suffering. Many of us have seen the pictures of the piles of garbage, and our environment cannot withstand this onslaught. They are overflowing in many of our national parks. Our national parks are the crown jewels of our nation's natural heritage. In 2017, the National Park System drew more than 330 million visits, including more than 10 million in my home state of Florida. These visits are not just from Americans, but also from people all around the world who came to see the natural wonders America has to offer. In 2017, national parks contributed $35.8 billion to the nation's economy and $613 million to Florida's economy, and they supported 306,000 jobs nationwide. Yet today, many are closed or short-staffed, and a diminished law enforcement presence puts the well-being of visitors and wildlife at risk. This is not the only major consequence of President Trump and congressional Republicans' efforts to block funding for the shuttered agencies that would be restored by this legislation. EPA has stopped making inspections of drinking water systems, hazardous waste management sites, and chemical facilities. During the last long shutdown in 2013, EPA stopped inspecting more than 1,200 sites of environmental importance and concern. Now more than ever, we need the EPA to provide rigorous guidance and support for state drinking water agencies. No one knows this more than the residents of Flint, Michigan, whose water is still not safe to drink. And closer to my home, Floridians in Ocala face the contamination of their water by harmful fire retardants used at the nearby fire college. Halting inspections leaves communities like these more vulnerable. These cuts can truly impact the people that we are elected to serve, and I urge my colleagues to vote for this bill so that the Senate can once again pass it and government can be reopened. With that, I yield back.
Gentlewoman, Florida yields. Gentlewoman from Minnesota reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Idaho, the former chairman of the committee, Mr. Simpson.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from California, my good friend, for yielding and for the job that he has done as chairman of this Interior Subcommittee in the past. Let me begin by saying that we all want the government to reopen. All on this side, all on that side want the government to reopen. We don't agree with this shutdown. I also want strong border security. I know you all want strong border security. We disagree about how to get there. These can both be accomplished with a little word called compromise. Now, I've heard everybody throw around that word quite a bit and then go back to their hardened positions and forget what a compromise is. So I looked it up in the dictionary because I thought maybe I was mistaken about what a compromise is. The dictionary says it's a settlement of differences by mutual concessions and agreement to reached by adjustment of conflicting and opposing claims and principles by reciprocal modification of demands. We can't call for compromise and then go back to our hardened positions and say, I want everything I want and you get nothing you want. This bill is not a compromise. If you would bring up the compromised conference bills between the House and the Senate, you'd have my support. But that's not what this is. This is the Senate bill. We have a conferenced bill between the House and the Senate that was prepared to be brought to the floor last year, never made it. Bring up that conference report. Unfortunately, by adopting just the Senate bill, we might not even have a House chamber. Why have a House chamber if all we're going to do is adopt whatever the Senate decides to do? This bill, as has been mentioned, reduces funding by $160 million from the House bill for Indian country. $21 million reduction from the House bill for hazardous fuels reductions that prevent catastrophic wildfires. $23 million reduction from the House bill on sage-grouse funding that is vital to keep the species off the endangered species list. $27 million reduction from the House bill for national park funding that is needed to solve the maintenance backlog. $12 million reduction from the House bill for Water Infrastructure Financing Act, which is critical to financing community water projects given the enormous backlog that exists for our water system. The bill also leaves out vital report language directives from the House bill that were carefully crafted to represent House members' priorities, both Republican and Democrat priorities. They are being totally ignored with this legislation. And in the end, we all know this isn't going anywhere. This is just a game. And I got to tell you, Mr. Speaker, I'm tired. I'm tired of the finger pointing, the name calling, the games we're playing. I know that on the Democratic side of the aisle, you're getting phone calls by the hundreds, if not thousands, from your constituents that say, don't give in to Trump. Don't give in to any border security wall or fencing or whatever. We're getting the same phone calls on our side that say, don't you vote for anything that doesn't have Trump's border wall in it. You know, the uncomfortable thing is that occasionally as elected representatives, we're called upon to lead, regardless of the consequences. And I have to say, we've all failed. All of us. And for that, I am very, very sorry. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Idaho yields back. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentlewoman from Minnesota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a rhetorical question, and that would be, if we had been able to bring the continuing resolution to the floor, if we would have been able to get the president
We'll
to
leave this
sign
House
it,
debate to go
would that
to
have
the
given us
president
the
at the White House. He's been convening a briefing on border security with state and local community leaders.
crisis. We are in a crisis in this nation. I pray today for our president. Thank you for his stand. Thank you for his courage. We pray for his wisdom today to be increased as we hear from around the nation. We pray today for your guidance. Bless the patrols that are on the border, those that are putting their life on the line. We pray for the victims' families of people who have suffered and lost loved ones because of the crisis that we're dealing with in this room today. Give us grace and give us help in the time of need. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor, very much. I appreciate it. It's beautiful. So we're here today to address the humanitarian and security crisis on our southern border. I just got back. It was a sight to behold. Not pretty. Very dangerous. Drugs are flowing across. Human traffickers, you think of that as an ancient crime. It's not an ancient crime. It's more prevalent today in this world, far beyond the United States. It's a world crime given to us very much by the internet and bad people. The internet has made things in many ways better, in many ways much worse, but human trafficking, grabbing women in particular, and children, but women, taping them up, wrapping tape around their mouths so they can't shout or scream, tying up their hands behind their back and even their legs and putting them in the backseat of a car or a van, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 at a time. They don't go through checkpoints. They go through areas that don't have a wall or don't have a steel barrier. They go up to the checkpoint, and before they get to it, they make a right or a left, depending on where they are. And they go out into the desert or out into the land, and they find the first area that doesn't have anything blocking its way. And they have mini highways all over the place. You can see it all over the place, and it's not good. And the only way you're going to stop it, the only way to stop it, without question, is with a very powerful wall or steel barrier. This is part of what we've just finished. This is a section that we're doing, what we've designed since I've been in. Some of the wall that they put up over the years, which, by the way, should have been put up, whether it looked good or not, should have been put up a long time ago. We inherited a lot of problems, whether it's North Korea, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's a lot of other things. We took over a lot of problems, and we're straightening them out one by one. One of the big problems we have is our border, our southern border. And we're going to take care of it. Now, the easy solution is for me to call a national emergency. I could do that very quickly. I have the absolute right to do it. But I'm not going to do it so fast, because this is something Congress should do. And we're waiting for the Democrats to vote. They should come back and vote. They want to go home. They're probably home by now. And Nancy and Chuck and all of the folks that could settle this thing in 15 minutes, I used to say 45 minutes, now I say 15 minutes. It's so simple. We need money for a barrier. If we don't have a barrier, we're just wasting all of the other money. There's no technology that's any good. I think you'd say that. You know that probably better than anybody, most of you guys. You know, without the barrier, you don't have security. Without the barrier, you have people driving in loaded up with drugs, with smuggled people, with all sorts of things that you don't want to know about. So we need a barrier. It's a very simple meeting. We could also do a much more major form of immigration reform, and I'd look forward to doing that, along with many of the people at the table, including our Vice President. And we look very much forward to moving on that. But first, we have to get a barrier, because it all doesn't work without protection. The Rio Grande area where I was yesterday, you just have to look at it to see how dangerous it is. El Paso, Texas, went from one of the most unsafe parts or cities in the United States to one of the safest cities in the United States as soon as they put up the wall. They built a wall and fencing apparatus that blocked people. So they went from one of the most dangerous cities to one of the safest cities, all within a very short period of time. It's common sense, folks. Everyone knows it works. Everyone knows it's not expensive. They say it's medieval. Well, so is the wheel medieval. I looked at all the vans and all of the serious equipment that they surrounded me with yesterday. The Secret Service, the police, the Border Patrol, ICE. Every one of those had the wheel. Well, they say wheels are medieval too, but some things don't change. Wheels and walls. And they haven't found an alternative to either of those two, right? They haven't found an alternative. So we want Congress to do its job. We want the Democrats to come back and vote, wherever they may be. I haven't left the White House except to go to Iraq for a very short period of time, where I had a great experience, frankly. I met some great people, some great generals. We have great ideas having to do with Syria. That's working out very well, knocking the hell out of ISIS, and we're bringing our folks back home, and we're going to always have a presence. And it's working out very well. A lot of things are working out well. North Korea is working out very well. A lot of things are working out well, but the southern border is something that should be easy. So what we're not looking to do right now is national emergency. What we want to do, we have the absolute right to do it. In many ways, it's the easy way out. But this is up to Congress, and it should be up to Congress, and they should do it. And if they can't do it, if they yell that we can't do it, there's no way we can vote for security. There's no way we can vote for safety. All Nancy and Chuck have to do is tell me. And you know what? We'll start thinking about another alternative. But this is one of the easy votes they'll ever have. It's very simple. And then we go on to major reform on immigration. And I look forward to that, because after 50 years of talking about it, they should have done it. And frankly, previous presidents should have done the wall. It should have been done, not just sections, small sections. The problem with doing a section of wall is they come around it. So the wall works for the area that it is, but when you have the big openings, they just come around it. And we can't allow that to happen. So we have great plans. I met yesterday with the Army Corps of Engineers. You know, we're building the wall right now as we speak. Somebody said, oh, but we had $1.6 billion and they haven't spent it. The reason we haven't spent it is because the contractors are building it. And unlike governments, and this government in particular, I like paying after it's built instead of before it's built. Okay, I learned that a long time ago in building buildings. You let your contractor do the work, and then you see if they did a good job, and if they didn't do a good job, don't pay them. And if they do a good job, pay them fast. So a lot of fables were told, a lot of lies were told. So we're building wall as we speak. We've done a lot of renovation. Some of the renovation, we had no choice. We had to rip it down and build new wall. You'll see that in San Diego and some other areas where we actually went to a new wall because it was almost better and cheaper in some ways than trying to renovate old garbage that wasn't going to work. And in some cases, you had a good structure, you had a good basis, less expensive to renovate, generally speaking, and we've done a great job. So we've done a lot of renovation. We've done new wall, and we're building the new wall as we speak. And the money that they say we didn't spend has been spent, but it hasn't been paid. There's a big difference. And when the contractors finish up, they get paid, and they're doing a second section. Army Corps has been very impressive. Working with them has been great. The new wall that we've designed is really beautiful. It's visual. You can see through it, which you have to be able to do. I mean, I'd like to have a concrete wall in one way, but in another way it wouldn't be very effective because you can't see to the other side. So these are steel walls, and in many cases steel walls. It's steel that has concrete inside. It's pumped into the steel. It's hollow, and it's pumped into the steel. So it's sort of a combination of both, which is not a bad combination. So I just want to thank the people at this table, some very special people, some great friends of mine. And what I thought I'd do is just go down to my left, and maybe I'll have 3 or 4 of you say a few words to the press, and then we could all start talking about what we'll be talking about, okay? And Bunny, you've been a friend of mine for a long time, right from the beginning, and I appreciate it. And maybe I'll start with you, and we'll go over to AJ.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm the Sheriff of Chester County, Pennsylvania. Thank you for inviting us here today. Chester County is located, as you know, just southwest of Philadelphia. an area you're familiar with. We're known as a healthy, wealthy, and wise county and the home of QVC.
That's right.
I like to tell you that because I want to let you know what a wonderful county it is of 500,000 people. And I want to share with you a very short story of a young boy named Ben who took a trip one night from Chester County into the city of Philadelphia, where he acquired heroin laced with fentanyl. He brought that back to Chester County, and within an hour, he was dead. I spoke to his father yesterday and told him I would be seeing you today. And I asked his father if there was anything he wanted me to share. He gave me a wonderful story. I've given it to Kellyanne. Kellyanne, you have the story, the family story. But I just want to read you the last line of the letter he sent to you, Mr. President, relating to his son, Ben. His body was exposed to a heroin substance, new on the scene, laced with fentanyl 100 times the strength of morphine, which stopped his heart and breath, robbing us of our only beautiful boy. Drugs that came over our unprotected southern border, and by the way, the DEA did trace this directly to a cartel over the Mexican border. Drugs that came over our unprotected southern border, wreaking havoc on the lives of hundreds of thousands of lives and millions of loved ones. We need to do something about this. Please, Mr. President, hold the ball.
Thank you. Let's please say hello. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. AJ, Sheriff.
Mr. President, from the men and women of law enforcement at the federal, state, and local level, we thank you for standing tall for us. Let me address the word manufacturer that we keep hearing. Very demeaning to law enforcement because there's not one agent, not any agency in this country that is not affected by manufacturing. Manufacturing, I mean by the metric ton of methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and marijuana that each agency in our nation has to fight every single day. And it is extremely distressing to law enforcement to have to listen to the rhetoric about manufactured crisis when we, for 10 years, over a decade, have been fighting this religiously every day that affects every law enforcement agency in the United States on a constant basis. So again, sir, thank you for your position on this and standing tall for us.
Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate it. On Wednesday, you probably heard a very young person with a great life ahead was stabbed, viciously, violently killed by an MS-13 gang member who entered our country recently through the southern border. He had a friend with him. They both came in together. Here, just for a short while, killed somebody. That wouldn't be the first. We have them locked up in pretty tough conditions. It's a disgrace. Came through the southern border. Please, say a few words.
Mr. President Trump, I'm Pastor Pasquale from the International Church, Las Vegas. Thank you for having me today. Thank you for everything you're doing for America.
Thank you.
I would like to share something with you about human trafficking, the crisis we're having. As you know, we're connected to California. Las Vegas, Nevada is next door. Many of the girls that are being brought across the border through San Diego area end up in Las Vegas. And what happens there is that, you know, they're illegal immigrants, families that are coming in, and we are, we're having the parents are coming to the churches and asking us if we could help them find their daughters because their daughters have been kidnapped and, you know, human trafficking. And they said, I asked them, did you call the police department? Yes, we did. So I connect with the police department. Police connects us back. We're working together. And we're able to get these young ladies back. But the problem is that we're having it happen more and more and more and more than ever before. And what happens with the parents, they're afraid to call law enforcement to come and help. So they come to the churches first. They feel they're going to get deported. So we're there as a safe place for them to come, but then we connect them with the police department and do educate the Hispanic communities that the police is not going to arrest them for something that's happening on human trafficking. So, sir, we need your help. And
so you are seeing human trafficking, especially with respect to young women,
yes,
more now than ever before.
Yes, young women, yes.
Pretty sad. Pretty sad. Thank you very much, Pastor. Appreciate it. Please.
Mr. President, thank you for letting me be here. John Jones, Chief of the Intelligence Counterterrorism Division with the Texas Department of Public Safety.
Great reputation, John.
We've been there for I've been in that position for 10 years. And as you well know, with Texas, we've been dealing with this crisis for a very long time. Some of the things we see and a lot of discussion you hear is about unaccompanied children, but the thing that bothers me is some of the children in Texas. In the last 7 years, we have over 4,000 people incarcerated that are illegal aliens in Texas jails for sexual assault. The sad thing is 62% of them are sexual assault against children. And those are Texas children. Those are American children. Those are our children. And for anybody to put a price on any child's life, that's our most precious and cherished national treasure. And we should do everything and anything as public safety servants, as parents, and as leadership to protect those children.
And closing up that border to the bad people would be a great thing, John.
Yes, sir.
Great thing. Please, thank you.
Mr. President, howdy. I'm T. Mike Lokar. I'm the sheriff of Victoria County. We're just north of Corpus Christi.
Right.
We're part of that Harvey territory, which got damaged that you came. Right. And we appreciate you and the Vice President coming to see us and visiting with us and supporting our progress. You've heard the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. Basically, we're the rest of the story. In 2003, there was unfortunately a national incident in our county with regards to loss of life. 19 people lost their lives in a tractor-trailer incident. I was one of the first responders. I walked around, and what I saw was a pile of deceased individuals with one child deceased as well, to which was in the arms of the children, of the father. I vowed from that point on to go forward and make a difference, not only for our brethren sheriffs on the border, but also ourselves inland. We have to be multi-dimensional on this. We've deemed it as a fatal funnel, Mr. President. It's a Rio Grande Valley to Laredo. Anything to and from, it's Houston and beyond. And so even in my jurisdiction, we have apprehended a child trafficking case in that area. We have taken on cases with slavery of the human being, but it's still all about law and order, Mr. President. And what we're saying is you have to shore up, you have to pursue the initiative that you have led. Now, I've been in forums like this with other presidents, and they listen, but you are the very first president, even in your candidacy, to support local, state, and federal agencies. And I admire you for that, and I appreciate you for that. But understand that it's multidimensional. Yes, it's the border. And as we told our fellow sheriffs on the border, look, if we can help you fix your problem, that's going to help us. And every day, my deputies, along with Sheriff Louderback, because we're adjacent to each other, are in pursuit dealing with one thing or another with transnational criminal activities. But I want to comment one more thing, and I'll move on. I appreciate you taking ONDCP, putting it back on that cabinet level. I serve on the Houston HIDA, which takes Houston and all the way to South Texas. If it weren't for the HIDAs and ONDCP and funding, and this is your best resource now, I'm sure some of the feds may differ, but there's a matrix of state, local, and federal that are part of those HIDAs across the nation, and they are the subject matter expert. And they have helped us with information, intelligence, outreach, etc., to try to work on this. But until we have this means of a barrier, wall, call it what you want, you've got to have that before we can solve our problems down the road. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Sheriff. When you talk about the big trailers coming in and loaded up with people, and the doors are locked in the back, and sometimes they're left abandoned and they all die a hell of a death. They're suffocated. They come from the other side of the border. They don't go through a checkpoint. Can't go through a checkpoint because they open up the back doors, they take a look. So you go, and they go out onto the different areas, depending on where you're going, what checkpoints. They go in between the checkpoints. Most of the problem, we had a lot of drugs, a lot of things at the checkpoints, but they're usually hidden in hubcaps and engines and under the floor. But the big stuff comes in between the checkpoints. And the trailers come in loaded up with people with the doors locked in the back. They don't even give them a chance. The doors are locked. And sometimes you have the drivers running away. It's a disgrace. All of this comes in between the checkpoints where there is no wall, because you'll have some wall, a little wall, left and right of a checkpoint, generally speaking. But in between checkpoints, you may have 50 miles, 60 miles, even 100 miles. And that's where tremendous problems occur. And even yesterday I read where, fairly close to where I was, like 26 people were killed.
Yes.
Gang members and drug dealers, they were killed like a few days ago, right next to where I spent quite a bit of time with great people from Border Patrol. You know about that? You heard about that? This was like, it's amazing because it got no publicity. I didn't see it. You don't read about this stuff. They're not telling you the truth about, really, you're doing this country a tremendous disservice. You're not telling the truth about the criminal activity and the crime. 26 people or thereabouts. What was the number? 26?
Yes, sir.
26 people were killed over the last couple of days. Nobody even talks about it. I haven't heard about this young person that was killed yesterday, 16 years old, brutally murdered. I haven't heard anything about it. The media is not telling the American public how bad it is, how dangerous it is. I mean, I read a little story about the 26. I said, how could that be a small story? But what's going on, the crime and the drugs and the smuggling and of everything, including children, we're talking women, yes, but probably the biggest victim of everything we're talking about today are children. And children are used. They're dropped on the border and they're used to get people across because they have an advantage because of the stupidity of what we've got and laws that we've inherited. They have an advantage if they have a child. So they grab children at the border. They walk across. They get across easier if you have children. So they're just using the children. Then they tell them to get out of here. The worst victims are the children and the women. And you don't write about it. You know, you write about nonsense. You write about Nancy Pelosi saying it's immoral to have a wall. It's immoral to have all these people killed. These people are being killed, and you don't report it because you're fake news. You don't report it. Many of you. 26 people killed, and I didn't even hear about it. I mean, nobody even knows about it. And that's, how close is that to where I was yesterday? It was right alongside, I think, right? How far is that away?
Miles away.
Miles away. You don't even hear about it because you don't want to tell the story of what's going on at the border. You don't want to tell the story about how dangerous it is. So you have people get up and say walls are immoral. What's immoral is what's going on. There's never been anything like it. And we can stop it so easy. And the Border Patrol and ICE, they're doing a fantastic job. But we're not giving them the equipment when we're not giving them the walls or the steel barriers or whatever you want to call it. We're not giving them the equipment. Remember El Paso. Remember what I said about El Paso. From one of the worst to one of the best. Yes, ma'am. Please, go ahead.
I'm San Diego County Supervisor Kristen Gaspar. We're the 5th largest county in the nation. We actually have the busiest land crossing in the entire world. And we do rely on our border to maintain that strong binational economy, but at the same time, we rely on our border to keep us safe. The last time I had the opportunity to share the tragic loss of Alexander Mason, a young person in San Diego who was brutally murdered while his killer slipped freely across the border into Mexico. Today I'd like to share with you an alarming trend about what's really happening with the insecurity of our border when it comes to the exploitation of our children. There's an alarming trend in San Diego that our young teens in San Diego schools are being actively recruited by violent drug cartels. They're being pack mules for these drug cartels, smuggling heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl across the border. It's become such an alarming trend that they're being recruited over social media, they're being recruited over gaming consoles, they're being recruited in traditional safe spaces like our schools and our libraries and our parks. Last year, 527 San Diegans lost their lives. They overdosed because of these drugs that are pouring across our border. In addition, San Diego is America's finest city, but America's finest city is now home to the second largest human trafficking industry in the country. Our children are being sexually exploited because of the insecurity at our border. San Diego, this evil industry, raked in close to $1 billion last year. There are 12,000 human trafficking victims and survivors in San Diego County alone. The average age, 16 years old. 16 years old. A third of this trafficked population are the very immigrants who have come to the United States to make for a better life. Now, 2,200 miles from Washington, D.C., representatives like me are held accountable by these families and these victims each and every day while a standoff continues here. And so I challenge our congressional members to meet with these families, to meet with these victims, to look them in the eye and tell them that this is not a crisis. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And this is where I ask the Democrats to come back to Washington and to vote for money for the wall, the barrier, whatever you want to call it, it's okay with me. They can name it whatever they can name it, peaches. I don't care what they name it, but we need money for that barrier. I will say this, the Republicans have been rock solid. They want this to happen. They wanted it to happen a long time ago, and frankly, for many years, I'm not just talking about now, I'm talking about for years. I gave yesterday an example with Israel. For many years, everybody campaigning for president said they were going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, the American embassy to Jerusalem. This went on, Pastor, as you know, for many, many years, many presidents, dating back all the way to who was the first. And they never did it. And I said the same thing, same words, same campaign, but I did it. I got it done, and people are very happy. Jewish population and evangelicals, unbelievably happy. I did it. I understand why they didn't do it, because it was very tough to do. It met with a lot of nasty talk before I did it, and then I did it, and it was done. And now we've just opened up the embassy, as you know, long ahead of budget and schedule, and way under budget. Like, how about $1 billion under budget? Opened it up for almost nothing, an existing building that we renovated. But the fact is, for years and years, I heard about the embassy going to Jerusalem. And the people would campaign. They're in for 4 years, they're in for 8 years. They'd never get it done. I got it done. This is a very similar thing. I've been hearing about putting a really good wall, and in my case, I like to say a beautiful wall, because I think it makes a difference. I've seen some of the wall they put up. It's so unattractive that I can understand why other people don't want it. But this is a great looking structure. I mean, it's going to look great. It's going to do the trick beyond belief. It's far better than anybody had projected. We have it at a much lower cost, and it's better, stronger. It's better. And you have the vision through. You're able to see through. But we're going to get it done. And I compare that to the embassy because they talked about it for 45, 50 years, longer. And we got it done. We're going to get this done too. Now, Republicans are rock solid. I have to hand it to them. Mitch McConnell, every one of them. Kevin, they have been so strong on this. I'm very impressed. The Democrats are just following politics. And I'm not saying that for any reason. Otherwise, I guess they're looking at 2020. They think, gee, if we can hurt Trump, we'll have a better chance at winning an election. This isn't about winning an election. This is very simply, very simply about doing what's right for the country. And we have to do what's right for the country. This is common sense. This is not sending rockets to the moon. This is common sense. We have to have this. The country has to have it. They've been talking about it for 35 years. And they do little pieces, a little piece here, a little piece there, put a piece where we need it. The people just go around it. We have to have it. got to get done. It's going to get done now. Congress has to do its duty. And the Democrats have to help us. They have to come back to Washington, and they have to vote for border security. They have to vote for safety. It's national security, too. They have to come back and they have to vote. It'll take us 15 minutes, and then we're going to get on to much bigger immigration reform, because we should do that. We should do that. I want to thank everybody for being here. We're going to have now the rest of the meeting. Media, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any message to the federal employees? Any message to the federal employees who are not being paid today?
Yeah, the message is that I appreciate their service to the country. They are incredible people, the federal employees that we're talking about. But many of them agree with what I'm saying and what the people in this room who are experts are saying. They don't want to see people killed because we can't do a simple border structure. And I appreciate their incredible support. We have, yesterday, I was watching this morning and reading this morning that so many people are saying the president is doing what's right, and even though it's affecting us short-term, temporarily, as you know, a bill was just passed, which I will sign in Congress, making sure that everybody's going to be paid immediately upon when this is over. But I just really appreciate the fact that they have handled it so incredibly well. And many of them agree with what we're doing. We have no choice. Steve, go ahead.
24 hours ago, you were saying you were probably going to declare a national emergency.
No, I said I could do it, but well, I'll tell you what. It's the easy way out, but Congress should do this. This is too simple. It's too basic. And Congress should do this. If they can't do it, if at some point they just can't do it, this is a 15-minute meeting. If they can't do it, I will declare a national emergency. I have the absolute right to do it. It says as clear as you can. Now, what will happen? I'll be sued. It'll be brought to the Ninth Circuit. And maybe, even though the wording is unambiguous, just like with the travel ban, it'll be appealed to the Ninth Circuit, and we'll probably lose there too, and then hopefully we'll win in the Supreme Court. But that's what happens. You can take the most perfectly worded document, as we have in this case, and they'll always bring it to the Ninth Circuit. And then you never know what's going to come out of the Ninth Circuit, and you never know what's going to come out on appeal. But fortunately, we have a Supreme Court that's treated us very fairly. So I'd rather not do it, because this is something that Congress should easily do. This is something that the Democrats should do. And I don't want to give an easy way out of something as simple as this. Not only simple, it's easy, and it's going to secure our, we have a country that is under siege. You could actually, a lot of people don't like the word invasion. We have a country that's being invaded by criminals and by drugs, and we're going to stop it. So I want the Democrats to come back to Washington and vote. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
You don't have anything to say about these accusations that you're overhyping the problem.
Thank you very much. Good job, yesterday. Appreciate you. I appreciate you. I didn't see the invasion of the world. It's because we had a wall.
Actually, there are portions that didn't have a wall.
Come on, guys.
Some people are dumb.
Come on.
Thank you. Good promotion for us. It was a great promotion. You see that?
Here's a look at our primetime schedule on the C-SPAN networks. Starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN, House debate on a bill that reopens part of the federal government, funding the Interior Department and national parks. On C-SPAN 2, a Supreme Court oral argument in a case looking at whether patients can sue in state courts after the FDA rejects a manufacturer's proposed warning label for a drug. And on C-SPAN 3, a discussion on American exceptionalism and the changing role of American foreign policy.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, live every day with news and policy issues that impact you. Coming up Saturday morning, Professional Services Council Executive Vice President Alan Chvatkin will join us. He'll talk about the government shutdown's impact on government contractors. And the conversation continues with the National Parks Conservation Association's Kristen Bringle. She'll discuss how the government shutdown is impacting the national parks. And then Washington Examiner editorial director Hugo Gurdon will talk about conservative journalism in the era of President Trump. Be sure to watch C-SPAN's Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Saturday morning. Join the discussion.
Tomorrow, C-SPAN's 2020 Road to the White House coverage continues with former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Julian Castro. He's expected to announce his decision on whether or not he'll run for the presidency next year. The event takes place in San Antonio, and it's live Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN.
The Senate confirmation hearings for William Barr to be the next Attorney General of the United States begin on Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. In December, President Trump nominated Mr. Barr to replace Jeff Sessions, who held the position for over a year and a half since the beginning of the Trump administration. William Barr is now of counsel at the law firm of Kirkland and Ellis and served as the U.S. Attorney General for President George H.W. Bush. Watch the confirmation process for Attorney General nominee William Barr live Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3. The House earlier today passed a bill funding the Interior Department and national parks by a vote of 240 to 179. That was the fourth spending bill the House approved this week to reopen parts of the federal government. But the Senate has said that they will not consider any of these spending bills because President Trump has announced that he'll veto them if they reach his desk. The House is done for the week, so is the Senate. But this morning, House lawmakers debated a measure that required federal workers who've been furloughed to be retroactively paid after the government shutdown ends. Here's a look at that debate.
As we, Mr. Speaker, enter day 21 of the Trump shutdown, it is incumbent upon the House to do everything we can to address the pain and suffering being felt by dedicated federal workers who are missing their paychecks. Most of them are living from paycheck to paycheck. And now they approach this day on Friday having moved from paycheck to no check. Today, 800,000 federal employees will not receive their first paycheck of this new year. Regardless of what members think about the causes of the shutdown, every single one of us should agree that hard-working federal employees who give their blood, their sweat, and their tears to lifting us up as a nation should not be held hostage to politics as a result. 380,000 federal employees have been furloughed and locked out of their offices. Another 420,000 federal employees, hardworking employees, working without pay. We will see them at our airports. We'll see them working today and tomorrow, and have been for the last many days without pay. Some even had to cancel already scheduled vacation days or sick leave to report to work. These 800,000 men and women include personnel at the Federal Aviation Administration, the Bureau of Prisons, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Homeland Security, the Food and Drug Administration, and Departments of Agriculture, Treasury, and Justice. These are the men and women who keep our country safe. ensure the safety of our airports and food, protect our national parks, and yes, keep our economy moving. Senate Bill 24 should provide back pay to federal employees furloughed during this shutdown and potential future shutdowns. The measure also would allow essential employees to use their annual leave instead of having to cancel already scheduled and approved vacation plans. Many federal employees are suffering. But not only are they suffering, Mr. Speaker, their children are suffering. And they are in pain, and they're worried, and they're scared. You see, they have mortgages and car loans to pay, daycare expenses to cover, and food to put on the table. And even while they struggle to pay these bills, furloughed employees face the stress and anxiety of not knowing whether or not they will be paid when the shutdown ends. The least we can do is to relieve that uncertainty. The President claims that federal employees support this pointless shutdown. He also had the nerve to say, why don't they just adjust? Adjust with what? And how? And so I've not heard that from a single federal employee that they support this shutdown. What they want to do is to get back to work serving the American people. And what they are saying over and over again is, government, do not hurt us, help us. Do not hurt us, help us. So promising they will receive back pay once shutdown ends is the least that we can do. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this bill passed the Senate with every single senator's consent. And President Trump has indicated that he will sign it. I urge every member of the House to do the same and support this bill. And let's end this shutdown and get the government open and working again. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. Gentleman from Montana is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of S-24, the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019. This bill is a promise to our dedicated civil servants, both those forced to the sidelines and those still hard at work without pay. When the House Democrats stop using federal employees' livelihoods as a political football to fund the government, including border security, paychecks will be issued. Mr. Speaker, to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, we get it. You don't like the president. You made your point. It's now time to stop messing around. We need to fund the government so we can make good on the promise in this bill. And let's be clear, this bill does not stop the immediate pain of missed paychecks. Under S-24, federal employees still do not get paid until the funding bills are passed and the government is reopened. Federal employees will still struggle to find ways to put food on the table and make ends meet until the House Democrats agree to negotiate in good faith. This bill also does not reimburse taxpayers for all the missed government services like our national parks and Indian Health Service. Every day this shutdown continues, taxpayers are on the hook for paying federal employees for jobs they are legally barred from doing. Every day this shutdown continues, Border Patrol agents and other federal employees are forced to work without pay. And every day this shutdown continues, many members of Congress are still getting paid. I've instructed the administrative officials with the House to withhold my pay until the partial shutdown ends and until Border Patrol agents and other federal employees are paid. Members of Congress should not get paid when portions of the federal government are shut down. There are other pieces of legislation that would pay federal employees who are working during this partial shutdown, and there are others that would hold Congress accountable for not doing its job. I will support the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act, but I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, end the games, get back to work, let's get the job done. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the remainder of my time.
Gentleman from Montana reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished Speaker of the House, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi.
Gentlelady is recognized. Speaker of the House for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Assistant Speaker. I thank Mr. Cummings for bringing this important legislation to the floor in very expeditious time. The Senate passed it by unanimous consent yesterday, and here we are today on the first day that some of our federal employees will miss their paycheck, that Congress is saying and guaranteeing that workers will be paid not only for this shutdown, but God forbid if we have any future ones, that their pay will be guaranteed. I support the bill. I'm glad that it has strong bipartisan support as it did in the Senate, and that the President has given the impression that he will sign the bill. It ensures that 800,000 federal employees who are going without pay because of a senseless shutdown will ultimately get the back pay they deserve. But it's scarce consolation for these workers who are desperate to make ends meet right now. Their paychecks are going to be late, but they must pay their bills on time and in full. The impact of a missed paycheck is catastrophic in the lives of these Americans when they can't pay their mortgage, their rent, their utilities bill, their car payments, children's tuition on time. The list goes on. It affects their credit rating, and it affects the credit rating of the United States of America. I'm particularly concerned about the impact that it has on our veterans. A large percentage of the federal workforce are veterans. They have taken their commitment to public service in the military to public service on the civilian side. We don't do any favor for our friends, our veterans and military families if we affect their credit rating. So today, the press reported that workers are desperately taking to the internet to sell some of their household items and other things, sometimes at a very reduced price, for just a couple of dollars, just to pay their bills. This is just not right. It is just not right that we would subject people who work, and we say two things to them: come to work and don't get paid, or shut them out so they can't come to work. And while they're not getting paid, again, thousands of these men and women are expected to show up for work. Sending these workers their paycheck late is wrong. We keep saying that. It's wrong. But since there is a guarantee that they will be getting paid, I would hope that the commercial banks, the banks in our country, would follow the lead of some of the credit unions by giving interest-free loans right now to these families so that they can pay their bills in time and they can be respected for the work they do or are anticipated to do. This shutdown, by the way, is soon to become the longest in history, and it's creating chaos in our communities. It fails to have us, the government, meet the needs of the American people. We're endangering the safety of our food supply, the security of our airlines, the eviction of vulnerable families is affected, the support of our farmers and for their support systems, as well as food stamps for the hungry and tax returns, tax refunds for the American people, and the ability of the IRS to supply information to taxpayers who want to pay their taxes but need guidance. It's a needless crisis that is inflicting pain on the American people. Democrats support effective border security. We honor our oath of office to protect and defend our borders, our country, our people, and our Constitution. We need to look at the facts. According to the DEA, when the president says, oh, we've got to stop the drugs coming into the country. Well, let's look at the facts. The DEA says that almost all, 90% of illicit drugs coming into the country come in through legal ports of entry. If that's the president's concern, and it is a legitimate concern that we all share, we need to build the infrastructure, increase the size of infrastructure of the legitimate ports of entry. Those are ports of entry for immigration, for trade, and to stop the unwelcome in terms of drugs, contraband, and weapons coming into our country. So more infrastructure, improve the roads there to facilitate. We also need, the technology exists, and we've all committed that we would pay whatever it is, $400 million or more, for the infrastructure, the technology to scan the cars for the drugs and the other contraband. So again, technology is our friend in this, and it is very effective, proven way to protect us from those intrusions. We can hire more personnel, which we must do. There are thousands of unfilled positions with the Border Patrol. We must have more people to do the job there. Much of what I'm saying here is what the administration, well, the Department of Homeland Security, asked for. And we said yes in the appropriation bill and bills, and here we are having that fight later. And we can have more investment in innovation to detect unauthorized crossings. So we don't need what the president first described as a concrete wall 30 feet high paid for by Mexico. Cross out all of the above. It's not that. But the fact is, spending money on whatever that is that the president is describing it now as, is an